So aloha mai kako. Welcome to all of our viewers out there with the Global Peace Wave and watching from wherever you are. Welcome to our session, which is titled Mākua, a Piko of Peace, and we'll explain what that title means. My name is Kyle Kajihiro. I'm the president of Hawaii Peace and Justice, and we are one of the co-sponsors of this session. I also am an assistant professor in ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And prior to that, I used to be a program coordinator for the American Friends Service Committee in Hawaii. And I've been involved in working with Mākua Valley, trying to get the military to clean up and return the land since about 1996 when I was working for the American Friends. And so I've been on and off the board of Malama Mākua now also for a number of years. So tonight, we're having just a talk story, a conversation about Mākua Valley, one of these beautiful lands in Hawaii that have been seized by the U.S. military and have been abused as a training site for America's wars. And we're going to talk with a couple of other leaders of Malama Mākua, one of the main groups that has been working for a long time to secure the protection and return of Mākua Valley as a place of peace and a place for Hawaiian culture to thrive. So I'm here tonight with Lynette Cruz, who's the president of the board. Yeah, Lynette, still yet?
Yes.
and Sparky Rodriguez. I don't know. You have a title, Sparky?
No, member.
Yes, member, but long time.
Member,
long
past
time.
president.
Yeah.
He's
Maybe
been
future
the
president.
He's been the foundation of Malama Mākua for a long time. So yeah, welcome and thank you both for making time to come and share a little update about Mākua Valley. I wonder if you would like to just say a little bit more about yourselves and your background and involvement with Mākua.
I am retired, retired teacher from Hawaii Pacific University. Well, actually, I'm still on faculty there and retired from the York Community College, where I taught for a few years after I moved to the West Side. Busy, but unpaid. Volunteer work nowadays.
Yeah. Sparky Rodriguez, part of the founding members of Malama Mākua, and we started from two separate groups. One was a homeless Hawaiian group that was on the beach battling the state, and then the other group was a peace and justice group that we ended up meeting together at the front gate of Mākua. And that was really the beginning of Malama Mākua, and working on the understanding of how government, military, and capitalism really affects land use, poverty, homelessness, and our economics. So in the background, the lady with the hat on and the stick, that's my wife. She passed several years ago. This is one of our accesses that we have going into Mākua to demonstrate the value of the cultural presence that was there for centuries, if not longer, and how the military has abused, desecrated cultural sites and without any accountability. So that's kind of where we started.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And that site is that's the Ki'ipohaku, yeah, that's a petroglyph rock that we're stopping at. So if you look really carefully, I think you can maybe make out some of the images of humans and dogs and other creatures there. So it's yeah, it's a very special place. And my background also is a view from the mountains looking down into Mākua Valley. And so to just situate folks who may not be familiar, Mākua is on the west side of Oahu in the Waianae Coast. It's one of the last ahupua'a or land divisions before you get to the western tip of the island. And it's one of the last intact valleys where you can go from the tip of the ridge of the mountain all the way down to the sea and out into the ocean, which is undeveloped. And also a site that was taken by the U.S. military, one of many sites So we'll get into that history in a little bit. Do anyone want to say a little bit about just some of what's the general history and what's special about Mākua Valley?
Well, for generations, Hawaiians lived there. It was a secluded valley, and you could not get there unless you walked along the shoreline or came in by canoe. So it was more of a Shangri-La type of place where the people that lived there was very secluded from the outside world. And the streams flowed, and they had dry land forests, but they also had streams flowing that would end up feeding their lo'i, which was a primary food source, as well as sweet potato and a whole bunch of other things that they used to survive. And after the overthrow, one of the things that happened is that the military, the US government, ended up having a very aggressive effort of occupation. And they would go around the island and just basically take over. So a lot of the questions that I have is, how did they get this land? How did they get the leases? And what did they do to force the government at the time to give leases out? And Mākua Valley was being used by the military in the late 1920s. And the lease ends in 2029, so that's 100 years. But the lease was not signed until 1964. So it was a 65-year lease. They could do whatever they wanted to. They promised to return it, actually, after World War II to the people that were living there. But since then, they've claimed all of those properties as theirs in fee. And that basically evicted all of the people, a lot of them at gunpoint.
Yeah. So just to give a little context to that history you were sharing, because that's really important. So the Mākua Valley is about what, like 4,000 something acres altogether?
It's about 6,000.
Oh, 6,000. Okay. And all of that land, most of it, except for a few small parcels towards the coastline, were the government lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom before the U.S. Backed the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom and then later seized Hawaii. And so those kingdom lands are still disputed till today. There's what, like 2 million acres or something of Hawaiian Kingdom lands that include many of the public spaces like airports and harbors and whatever the state runs, and much of the military and federal lands come out of this government land of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So Mākua is mostly all government lands, and the upper portion, I guess from about here back to the mountainside, are lands that they claim to control through an executive order of the president. That happened after World War II, where they said, okay, we're going to use Mākua for training, and they just issued an order and took it and evicted all the families. But the lower third of the valley towards the coastline and out to the shore was supposedly returned to the state of Hawaii as a trustee for these government crown lands, and but simultaneously leased, right, to the Army in 1964 for a 65-year lease, and for the whopping price of $1.
$1 for all 65 years.
$1 for 65 years.
The insult is for 100 years, just $1. Yeah. And they don't have to clean up their mess.
Yeah. So this is part of the outrage, the kind of the hidden violence of militarization in Hawaii, is that beautiful places like this are bombed and burned and then used as a training site and littered with unexploded ordnance. So it's literally a minefield there. Did you have some thoughts about the history you'd like to share, Lynette?
Not really. I want to talk about how when we early on, after Mākua was formed, there was a lot of tension between us and the military. And whenever we went in for an access, which we got because Mākua sued the Army. And the result of that was accesses 2 times a month and some overnights and makahiki and other kinds of things like that. But I remember going in early in the day, and I think they really hated us. They're really not too friendly. That's okay. I mean, we have to work it out, I guess. And I guess I'm bringing that up now because things have changed. They don't hate us so much, or if they do, they keep it to themselves. And so our relationship has changed, and I'm going to assume that we're moving in the direction of explaining how that happened.
Yes, absolutely. Let's kind of pivot towards that. So Malama, you mentioned the lawsuit. In 1998, right? Malama Mākua sued the Army for failing to do an adequate environmental impact study of their activities there. And in 2001, there was a settlement agreement where the Army promised to do a thorough study within 3 years. And then all these conditions were added, including recognizing Malama Mākua as a cultural group that had rights to these twice a month cultural access to the valley. And they promised to clean up some sites, to do additional studies, but they failed, right? Wasn't it? They failed to complete the EIS within the time frame.
Yeah.
And so 2004, was it? The court issued a injunction on live fire training.
Well, the Army wanted to renegotiate and say, well, let's go ahead and just go back to training. And the judge actually told them that they received the benefit of the agreement and we were still waiting for our turn. And part of that was all the cultural sites that had been desecrated and bombed and blown up, like the Wakaki'i behind me, there's bullet holes in it. So part of the training activity has created a lot of that conflict. And initially the Army said there's no cultural sites in Mākua. And then there would be a huge fire at exposing these sites. So they couldn't deny it anymore. And it took years for us to educate them. And part of the fires would burn through cultural sites, but also through critical habitat for all the endangered species. There's about 44 endangered species, I believe, in the valley. So there's a lot that have been discovered over the last 20-something years. And now they're taking care of them. But it wasn't for the lawsuit. And the lawsuit came about by a fire that ultimately burned through some of the endangered species and destroyed them, burnt them all. So Fish and Wildlife was another agency that was complicit in allowing the Army to do the training and the destruction of the land that ended up taking a lot of endangered species.
Thank you. That's an important history to remember, that it took.
Sorry, I distracted a little bit.
No. But it was really the F-Suits folks that pushed to make sure that the Army was now doing environmental restoration, putting up fences, like snail cages, snail enclosures, right? All of these things. I mean, there's some real gems, real treasures all up in this upper area where we're looking down from. So let's talk about then, how did Malama Mākua begin to shift its mission and vision of organizing that Lynette was referring to? Can you talk more about that?
I think early on, the mission of Malama Mākua was to Malama Mākua, basically, and however that looked. And so mostly through accesses and teaching people about what was required for us to Malama Mākua. I mean, how do you do that? If you don't have access, except occasionally, and the Army is like everywhere with you when you're in the valley. It's not so easy to malama. You got to malama from afar. And I think we're getting discouraged. I mean, truth. People were starting to look at us as at Mākua as a kind of tourist destination. I mean, you never been to Mākua? Yes, just call these guys or let's take a hike. We're going to go hiking. And we had several groups coming in specifically. because they wanted to do a tour or take a hike with us. And for a while, we actually did that, but it was kind of discouraging. That's not what we were there for. And so we were trying to figure out what we should do. And then I think last year, 2022, maybe before that, we decided it might be time to change our mission statement. And I think it was really well received by the older board members. I know that Karen Young was really happy that we would shift focus and look at peace. What is it that we want? What does it mean if we're going to Malama Mākua? What does that mean? And so we shifted our mission. And now it's, as I recall, because you were present in that discussion, we Malama Mākua as a piko of peace and ho'i ho'i ea. And so a center of peace and restored sovereignty, independence, life, breath. And when that happened, the way we approached the work changed, and it just came. This is all like during and right after the COVID. Then the Army locked us out, basically. We couldn't go in and we didn't know what to do. But after we shifted the mission to look at the center, if we cannot get to the center, what can we do? Well, it radiates out. We started doing all this other stuff, and it's been crazy and good.
I just wanted to maybe explain some of the imagery of the Hawaiian terms in there, because I think it's really powerful for folks that might not know. So piko is like your navel or the center. It's a place that connects you to past, present, and future generations. So if Mākua is a piko, is a place that is also, it's connecting to the past, but it's also giving birth and connecting us to future generations. So what is that legacy? And not only in time, but also in space, right? Because it connects us to other people around the world who have a stake in peace.
We've hosted thousands, I believe, of people over the last 20 years to come into Mākua. And everyone had their own agenda. But the idea was that initially, because the military, their mission is to train for war. Battle, using their weapons to kill and to meet their own agenda and their mission. So initially, we tried to get them to explain to us what culture are they protecting, and we didn't really understand what that meant, because we found out that their culture, Army culture, is what they're protecting. Hawaiian culture, not so much. So within that, they came to Mākua to train for war. Our efforts to go to Mākua was to create that piko, or the center of the universe, for peace. And within that discussion and that thought, how do we restore all the dryland forests? How do we rehabilitate and get our native forests back, but also the critical habitat for the endangered species? When Leandra and I, my wife and I started, we looked for help to help the Hawaiians gain access to the cultural sites. And what happened is that there's no assistance within the judiciary or government for Hawaiians to have access. So what happened is that we found that the laws support endangered species and critical habitat. So the direction of our effort went to support the Hawaiians without a voice, the endangered species, the Hawaiians without a voice. And that is what helped us get past that feeling of being taken advantage of. But once we did that, they had no defense. Once we went from let's get the valley back and restore it to piko of peace, now they have no defense. This is not about war. This is not about training or destruction. It is about protecting the land, the water, the endangered species, so that we all have a place to heal, but also to have peace. And that's something we might be able to train. We've been training the military, and we've asked, when we do our gathering, we normally do a a debrief at the end, and one of the colonels who joined us actually said, when we asked him, what is that you want? And he says, well, peace.
That was really good and revealing, but by that time, because you might say our attitude changed, we had to figure out what we mean by what we were saying, because we hadn't fully defined it. We just put it out there, and we found that everybody was taking pieces of it and working on it and developing programs that emanated from Malama Mākua, including working with the community, with the elders, with the houseless. I remember having a discussion with one of our members, Vince Dodge, and he said it's really difficult to have peace when people don't have food, when they don't have a place to live, and they're adrift. You want peace in the valley that emanates outward, you got to take care of everything. And so our focus, which was basically, looking at Mākua Valley, actually flipped. We started looking at everything else, all the other things, because we could not change necessarily what was going on in the valley. We didn't have that control, but we could change other things. And so our work has now broadened to include not the aina, just the aina inside the valley, but all of it, as much as we can, wherever we can. And so it extends throughout not just this island, but all islands and all places, and we're not limited. And it's been pretty exciting for me to see how Kia'i, because we have a bunch of young people that we work with also, both Mākua and Opio. And when they come into the conversation with us, they have different ideas, because they're more technology is their thing. Yeah. And we're still like, how do you do this, on your phone, right? So the shifting really was a mind shift. Whose kuleana is it? Whose responsibility is it for us to take care of whatever is around us in the process of looking to develop a peaceful world? Whose it? It's ours. I mean, we're right here, right now, and I like the idea of everybody looking at what they can do. What can you do where you are with what you have?
I like that one, Malama Mākua, the word malama, if folks don't know the Hawaiian language, means to take care of something, right? To give care. And so it's defined by that action and that relationship. And as a piko, it's radiating outward with the vision or the end goal of ho'i ho'i ea, to restore life and sovereignty and breath and all of those things, which is what that kind of solidarity work that you're doing, Lynette, and standing with these various communities that are struggling. You got to have ea in the community in order for aina to have ea, and vice versa, right? And like Sparky, you were saying too about your own thinking about the valley, and the critique of the military's role. And as a veteran, how did you come to that transition? Can you talk about your own thinking about that experience and then where it's come to?
Yeah, I'm a Vietnam vet, and going to a war zone, no matter what job you have, you always come back damaged. It doesn't matter. So coming back damaged, part of that was that I was very pro-American, pro-military, and that's how I felt. But then one of the things that happened when I started working and learning about the Hawaiian culture and the events that happened with the overthrow of our queen, the military's involvement in all of those things, and how the plantations and the missionaries at the time all colluded, that impacted the Hawaiian community. So with that, I was able to separate my American sentiment with my Hawaiian sentiment, and saying that I am not anti-American. I'm not anti-military. I am pro-Hawaiian and pro-Aina, which is about the land. And once I did that, I was able to separate my conflict that I had within me. So I don't have that conflict anymore. And I share that with the military when we do our access so that they understand that there's a way of separation of what our job is, but still maintaining that we have the responsibility to maintain peace. And that's got to be our ultimate goal. It can't be done with guns, bullets, bombs.
Mahalo for sharing that.
Not only that, I think part of the shift in our thinking includes a kind of holding oneself accountable. So the fish, it's not always aimed outward, but it requires us to do a lot of reflection to make sure that we meet our own standards, our own goals. So then as a result of that, of course, our relationship with the military changed. And that was kind of, I think it was a shock to them. Kind of a shock to us, but that's what happens when you kind of rethink what works, what could work better. And if we are truly working for peace, we need to emanate that. So anyway, Sparky could tell you some of the stories we've had experience with the people that are in control in the Army when we're on access. What started out early on, and I remember this, is really, really confrontational, turned into something else. And then when you start doing that, the idea of forming community wherever you are, it's really appealing. I mean, all these guys that we come across constantly, they're people too. They live in community and they want it. They value it. We can feel it. So the openings that have occurred as a result of us kind of being able to see them as somebody with a really shitty job sometimes doesn't take away from their humanity, right, or their ability to relate to the things that we're trying to share with them. So that was a major shift.
So what is the current status of the training, and where do you think things are going in terms of that relationship? Because I'm wondering if maybe the change in their attitude might also reflect a shift in their priorities in terms of the broader scheme of things, right? They've got some other sites that they are concerned about as well.
We're kind of living in interesting times, and that's because of Red Hill. What's going on at Red Hill and the poisoning of the water and the failure of the Navy, which to me represents like almost all the military. I mean, this is military, no matter what they're called, Navy, Army, Air Force, whatever. The failure of the Navy to take responsibility for poisoning the water. You might say, because all the military groups are lumped in, they all suffer, and their credibility going down quickly. I think it's a really good entry point. It makes it a lot easier for us to request from the military that they do certain things that are consistent with the idea of protecting us. And so, we just have to help them do it. And I think the idea of us offering to help them do what they're supposed to do, and which they're failing miserably at, has kind of shifted the way our relationship to them.
Yeah, a little bit of visual. When we first started, they had MPs at the gates with flak jackets, Kevlar helmets, M16 sidearms, and they would challenge us at the gate. And that's how we started. So there's very adversarial, but it created this animosity. And, it was like they were baiting us to go ahead and attack or respond to their presence. And because we were very cordial and respectful, they had a hard time. How do we defeat somebody that's in a peace mode or on a friendly relationship? They're experts at defending themselves in an aggressive environment.
Right, that's a reflex, right?
Yeah, but they, at some point, they said, well, okay, they stood aside and they let us in. And we've been doing that for over 20 years now. In fact, next year, August, is our 20 years of no live fire in Mākua.
Yeah, great.
It's kind of interesting. That will happen, you know, if you start hiring local. So you have the military hiring people who live here, who come from the community to work on their behalf. And that's kind of always the way it is, right? You put somebody with my face in front of me. And so, of course, we're going to try to be cordial and all of that. That's strategy for them. But even those guys I felt were super unfriendly, and, you know, kind of intimidating and trying to intimidate us. And none of us going to put up with that. But even they sort of took a step back because I'll say on purpose, we began to do educational programs on access. And that meant talking about the history of Hawaii. How are these lands taken? And even though our audience is supposed to be the people that are with us, the reality is anyone who accompanies us has to be fairly near to us. They're going to hear whatever it is. And I do recall having, I think, Ron Williams, who is at the State Archives and is also a professor of history, came and talked with us one time and told a story about Hawaii. And I think the colonel in charge at the time was really offended and kept saying stuff like, oh, that's not true. But the other guys, the local guys that were there, they hung back and walked with us as we're exiting the site. And the two guys that were there, two Kanaka, said basically, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's what happened. And so, you know, okay, for us, we win one round. And the idea of, trying to figure out how we use the time and space well when we're inside the valley has to do with raising consciousness right across the board.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that I know Sparky always talks about is how we have to listen to Mākua. So the valley also is, the Aina itself is a teacher that if we are open to it, we can receive what kind of lessons it has to offer, yeah? But when you close your ears, you don't listen, you don't see, you're going to miss it. So 2029, the leases expire. This means, this is like not only Mākua, but the Army has 4 leases in Hawaii that all stem from that 1964 moment when they had to sort of settle the land claims after statehood. And so they agreed to sign a 65-year for $1 lease for the lower portion of Mākua, several parcels in Kahuku on Oahu, another large chunk of land in Wahiawa on Oahu, and then a huge area on Hawaii Island at Pohakuloa. So all of these expire in 2029. And I'm saying that like the lease expires, it will be over. The only thing the Army prays for and is trying to do right now is to negotiate a new lease. It's a non-renewable lease. And so I know that groups are working to, for the cleanup and restoration of these places, including, Malama Mākua and others. But what are your thoughts about what needs to happen between now and 2029 and how people can support and get involved?
Well, let me cloud the issue a little bit. Just to the north of Mākua is Kaena. And on Kaena, there's a space command. And their leases come due 2029 as well. So my question is, do the Marines have leases? Does the Navy have leases? Does the Air Force have leases? What other leases that we don't know about that has been hidden and kept behind closed doors so that we don't question the validity of any discussions or extensions or renewals that we've been able to bring to light in Mākua? So the military has got the presidential edict, they got the leases, from the state over time. They've taken the Kuleana lands from the Hawaiians that were living there, forced them off, and now they claim it in fee. So it's created this whole convoluted issue that's confusing to a lot of us. And that makes, in my mind, it creates this thought that even our federal building, how did they get that land? How did the federal government take so much land? In Waikiki, how did they get that huge parcel on the beach? In Waianae, how did they get rest camp? You know, a lot of these are at gunpoint. And they would force the people off the beaches, off the land, and they occupied it very aggressively. Now the leases are coming due, and they want to continue this aggression. So my thought is no lease extensions. And what they can do is really clean up, pack up, and maybe find another place in San Diego or another place where they have a lot more ability to do their kind of activity.
Maybe they should ask the people there if they want it. Maybe not. Probably not. Right, there's some indigenous land over there too. I actually have some. You were asking about those other leases. I've been doing some research on that, and I have a student who's helping me as a research assistant. So we've compiled a bunch of leases, including Kaena Point and Haleakala and some of the ones on Kauai, and trying to analyze and put together some kind of information on that. So I'll be in touch, and I can share that with you folks. But we're going to try to sort of synthesize what we can understand from it and share. It's a puzzle why they're not doing environmental impact statements either. If those expire at the same time, they would need to renew, get a new lease as well, right? Which would require some kind of federal action. I don't know what the politics are of that with the Air Force and the Space Force, Air Force, and the Navy. The Navy has huge chunks on Kauai.
We haven't talked about Kauai or Schofield, because Schofield extends all the way to the North Shore of Wailua, where Army Beach is, and they still do training there, and Kauai. This is part of that aggressive occupation. They keep on occupying, and then pretty soon, well, this is ours. How'd that happen? Well, we put up a fence and a sign, keep out military property. And when I went to the Big Island, Kauai High Harbor, whole section is all fenced off. And now it belongs to the Department of Harbors, federal government. All of these different departments collude together for the benefit of a specific agency, whatever that might mean, the military, federal government. But it's very anti-Hawaiian, very anti-people, and very anti-Aina.
So I think we're coming up on the end of our time here. So if there's would you have any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
I'm going to go back to the thing that happened at Red Hill, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what that is before we continue. What are we talking about here, Kyle?
So Red Hill, or the Hawaiian name is Kapukaki, is a ridge near Pu'uloa or Pearl Harbor, where between 1940 and 1943, the Navy built 20 giant fuel tanks underground, and they were built in secret. The facility was classified until 1995, and each tank can hold 12.5 million gallons. So up to a total of 250 million gallons altogether. It sits 100 feet above the Halava Aquifer, which supplies about 20% of Honolulu's drinking water. And so those tanks are a ticking time bomb. They're 80 years old and have been leaking from the very start. We know of a number of them, including 2014, when 27,000 gallons spilled. And then in 2021, there was a 20,000 gallon spill that actually got into the Navy's water system and polluted the water for about 90,000 Navy residents and users of the Navy water system, Navy, military, and as well as civilians who use the system. And so there's thousands now who've been sickened, were evicted from their homes for about 4 months while the water is being flushed out. And as I understand, several thousand now have joined a federal tort lawsuit against the Navy for its negligence and the harm that they've caused to these families, possibly permanent harm to their health. So it's an ongoing crisis. There's still, they have still to remove the fuel from those tanks. So there's still about 105 million gallons sitting in the tanks as we speak. But they announced today that they just finished repairs that were needed so that they can defuel the tank safely. So hopefully that will happen soon, and they will be able to do the cleanup and dismantling of the facility permanently. But it has opened up a window for conversation about what is the true cost of militarism in Hawaii, and what is all this for if it's going to make our life on this island unlivable, right? If it's an existential threat to life on Oahu or in Hawaii, who's it
Major
serving?
protests, but
Yeah.
I think also major concerns about water,
Exactly.
our water, you know, and what's going to happen to us if nothing changes there. And so we recently, the Army, this is my understanding, generally speaking, the Navy owns the infrastructure and the Army owns the fuel. So the Army has been charged with removing the fuel, and then they brought in Brigadier General Okamura to kind of lead that effort because he's Kanaka and he graduated from Kamehameha schools, which is all good, you know. And then we found out, and it's probably a lot to do with Sparky guys and all of these hearings that they've had in Waianae over the years, where the military comes in to defend itself and everybody yells at them for like hours and hours, like all day and all night, and no one leaves until early in the morning, and it gives them a major headache. So really, they don't want to meet with community if they don't have to. But Waianae, Mākua has been forming coalitions with, ever since we changed our mission statement, with all kinds of different groups on the west side and everywhere else. And we have a nice, good, tight alliance with the Waianae Moku Kupuna Council. And because we're Kupuna and because the general is Kanaka, and they brought him back to kind of be the face of the effort to like network with community and, you know, explain to what's going on. And came to our Kupuna Council meeting, last meeting actually, a couple weeks ago, and explained everything he was doing and what the Army was charged with doing. And it was always also complicated, so much stuff, but we were able to videotape, and all of that stuff is up online if people wanted to listen. But what we learned from him is that he takes his cultural foundation seriously. So the idea of talking with Kupuna was to see if there might be some way that we could facilitate larger community discussions about this issue. And I'm going to assume it's because, you know, the military already has a couple black guys and would like to figure out, you know, how can we get along better with the people in the state or on the island of Oahu and all of that, which is fine. We're part of our peace mission is to be able to have dialogue. It doesn't mean that anything's going to change necessarily, but at least we'll have a chance to talk. So the Army has been very kind to us and offering us information, and invited Kupuna to go to their joint Red Hill Task Force Operations Center on Fort Island, which we did go. And of course, being who we are, because all the Kupuna I know, no one actually takes no for an answer. It's basically, oh, this is something we really should do. Let's just do it. And then we do it. And so my contribution, even though I haven't posted anything, was to say, can I take photos? And the answer, of course, was, oh, you know, kind of like nobody wants to say anything. And then I asked the general, can I take photos? He said yes. So we have photos. And that means that this is a real thing. I mean, people can't imagine it, but if you have a photo, you can actually see it as a real thing, something that is concrete that we can see ourselves and maybe relate to in some way. So we see concessions being made all over the place to try to meet the needs of community. And that tells me that down the road, maybe not right now, but down the road, we're going to have much larger discussions and in much better detail. The things that we want to bring up are like, do you think war is outmoded? Is there something else that you guys can do if what you're protect and serve or something like that? Can you do something else? Can you do better? Because you're failing. It's just a failure everywhere. And then of course there's a lot of like scuttlebutt, right? So we know that the possibility of the Army's release in Mākua may be like it's not going to happen because they don't really need it. They can't prove that they need it. They haven't needed it. But for us, that means that the focus may shift elsewhere, like to Pohakuloa. And so then our kuleana might be, how can we help Pohakuloa minimize the impact of all of that Army continued bombing on that Aina? How can we do that? And we don't know, but we have some ideas about how to move forward and get commitment that are public commitments, the kind that will probably make the newspaper, that talk about a vision that the Army might have that goes beyond like freaking never-ending wars. I mean, what else is there? We don't know. But if we think we can talk about it, we'll bring up, plenty of ideas for them to consider and just continue the engagement for as long as we can.
Great. Do you have any last?
Yeah, I'd like to share a couple of things. One of the things that you mentioned, Red Hill, and I believe there's like 700 Superfund sites there of toxic environment that hasn't been cleaned. And in Mākua, the first bullet or bomb that was fired that did not explode is still in Mākua. And this is the late 20s. So even the ones that have exploded in training, one of the EOD guys said that when a bomb or bullet explodes, not all of the energetic is translated into energy. So the bomb material gets thrown out into the environment. So for all of those years of the unexploded ordnance that didn't explode, their casings are now corroding and being exposed to the environment. And as with Pearl Harbor, all of these, we haven't even identified Superfund sites in Mākua, but the whole place has been used for training. So over Kyle's shoulder, that whole area that shows a little bit of red dirt, that is an area we're not allowed to go into because of unexploded ordnance. And it's so littered, they won't even let their own personnel in there. So that's going to be one of the things. How do we clean up all of the military toxins to make it so that we can get the land to live again, but also to support human activity? And I'm not talking about tourism. I'm talking about people living on the land, caring for the land, planting, creating food, and growing a healthy community. So we've got a long way to go. And the military is resisting, I'm sure. And in part of the lease, they said that if the value of their land is less than the cost of cleanup, all they got to do is write a check for the value of the land and leave. They don't have to clean it. That's part of the lease. So they already know that they can walk away. The other part that they have is they could get a presidential edict saying, no need, you guys are fine. Or turn it over to another agency like Fish and Wildlife, and then turn it into a preserve like they did in Puerto Rico in Vieques. Bombs still in the ground, showing right next to the road. But it's a preserve, so they can't even go in there and touch it. And we want to make sure that that's never going to happen.
Right.
And so restoring the land, cultural sites, our critical habitat, and protecting our native not only in endangered species, but the people.
Yeah. But on that note, that's a great vision to hold in our mind about the future for Mākua, but also how that becomes a beacon for other communities that are also struggling. You mentioned Pohakuloa, Vieques, our brothers and sisters in Guam, Okinawa, Philippines, other places that are also affected by the same networks of militarism. And I think what you're pointing out too, Sparky, about the limitations of the legal arrangements, the leases and so forth, means that the solution has to be political. It has to involve grassroots people power to make enough pressure that those kind of bad outcomes doesn't happen, and that we get the kind of vision that you folks are all working towards. So thank you so much for taking time to talk story and share about your folks' work. And it was great to see you the other night, and look forward to getting out to Mākua again. I haven't been out in a while. So, all right.
Thanks.
So from aloha. So from Hawaii, say aloha to all of you who are watching. Take care, and please visit Malama Mākua, MALAMAMAKUA.org. For information about Malama Mākua, and Hawaii Peace and Justice for our organization that's doing work on organizing around the land leases and getting these lands returned to Hawaiians. So looking forward to more work in the future. Take care. Aloha.